Hi guys, today we're going to be going over the best sets for each Rotom form in Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl. If you enjoy, of course, leave a like below, subscribe if you're new, and with that said, let's just get right into it. So today, unlike my vid on Heatran and the one I did way back in Gliscor, I'm just going to go over one set that I think will be really good per Rotom form, because realistically, I could do 6 different videos on the Rotom forms, and they would all be pretty much the same video, and I'd be really milking the topic. Eventually, people asking, why don't you do different Pokemon? And if I did all the Rotom sets in one video, this would be like an hour video. And most of the sets, again, would be the same set. So instead, I'm going over what I think will be the best set per Rotom form. Realistically, you can use any of the sets to go over for pretty much any of the forms. I'll go over my investments. Most of them, I'm not going to lie, are old Rotom sets that I do think realistically can be repurposed with a tiny bit of tweaking. But I think realistically, it's always been how Rotom's functioned. You don't really see a ton of variety in Rotom, believe it or not, despite it having 6 different forms. So I thought that it could really work with doing something like this. So hopefully this is an entertaining video for you guys, and hopefully you guys learned something. With that said, let's start off with base Rotom. We're going to go in ABC order. So this is Rotom Base. And I think that for Rotom Base, realistically, this was actually an A+ Pokemon, if I remember correctly, in regular DPPOU. And I do not think that's going to stay. I think the biggest reason was probably just the fact that it was the fastest of all of them. But I couldn't tell you. I genuinely cannot tell you. I didn't even find the others in the VR. So I'm assuming it's just combining all Rotom forms in there. Because they all used to be Electric Ghost in that generation. They didn't gain their unique typings until I believe Generation 5, if I remember correctly. But I didn't really do competitive until Gen 6. Except for like a very, very couple weeks of Gen 5. So because of that, I mean, I really couldn't tell you. With that said, though, I do think that regular Rotom still might have some use, but it's going to be very, very niche at best. I think it's going to probably be the worst one in OU at least. However, it could maybe have some low tier value. My best set that I think for this Pokemon will probably be either a Spec set or the set that I personally lean towards was Hex Nasty Plot with Hex Nasty Plot, Thunderbolt, and Thunderwave. I thought this could be really good because Rotom does, especially if there is a lower tier than BSP OU, it does have that potential for being one of the fastest Pokemon in the tier. At least for remotely competent Pokemon. So I do think that's already a huge plus. Not only this, but Electric Ghost actually hits fairly well too. And with Hex, you can go for Thunderwave spam. This could easily also be Will-O-Wisp, which would give you the edge of hitting ground types with a status, because you're already able to click Thunderbolt pretty freely. However, I thought that being able to slow any sort of Scarfers down could be very useful for a Hex Rotom. But realistically, either status works there. There's a lot of Rotom sets that could work really well too, but this is the one I think will best fit for regular Rotom. With the investment, it's 32 HP for the odd HP number, because no boots are in this game. With 252 special attack, just hit hardest. I went with 220 speed. I don't really think you need to creep other Rotoms, though I will say you could very easily go 252 for other regular Rotoms. It is really good at beating itself, if nothing else, if you have a Will-O-Wisp set. Or even just Shadow Ball, to be honest. Though Hex without a status probably would still do enough at +2 because of how frail Rotom is for a regular form. But I guess, yeah, that would be the Pokemon that Rotom would creep. This currently would creep Adamant based 100 Pokemon. So I thought that was something of note at the very least in terms of a speed creep. But you can easily just go with max speed here. This isn't really a Pokemon you need to go too in depth with the spread on. Next up, we have Rotom Fan. Now, I do actually think that Rotom Fan might have some use in OU, and I purely say this because of the fact that Zapdos lost all of its good flying moves. It only has Fly, I believe, right now. It doesn't even have Air Cutter anymore, which is the worst part. You can't even make the joke about having to run Air Cutter Zapdos, because it doesn't even get that anymore. So, I do think that alone, like, that factor does give this Rotom form some sort of use. I'm thinking probably Will-O-Wisp, Pain Split, Air Slash, and Volt Switch would be the set. This is the exact same EVs that Rotom-Wash currently is running, with creeping Adamant Scizor, and then obviously we have the 248. We adjusted it from 252 168 because there's no longer boots, so hazards are something that'll probably be a lot more common in this meta, especially rocks, which is Pokemon is weak to. Therefore, we want the odd HP number. Now, I do think that the Scizor creep is still very important because Scizor will for sure, it's for sure going to be an OU Pokemon. I tried to crack myself saying for sure, but I fucked it up twice. Regardless, so I do think this will definitely be an OU Pokemon. Scizor that is. So I do think that creeping Scizor is still very important there. You still also creep a lot of things like Modest and Polion, for example, which was another OU Pokemon last gen, and just stuff like that. The Will-O-Wisp is, of course, very important because of how many dragons, especially physical ones, things like Garchomp, for example, and Dragonite and Salamence. Will-O-Wisp is going to be great for those. Also, even just outside of dragons, Script or stuff like Scizor, for example, which this is a Steel Resist, which is great. So I do think this has a lot of merit, at least as a very, very niche Pokemon in the tier. And I think especially with the Zapdos and also Thundurus, but Thundurus wasn't really ever a Pokemon we expected to be in these games. But especially with the Zapdos Power Vacuum being open, I think this does have some niche there. Now, in terms of Defog, sadly the Rotoms do actually lack Defog, which is very unfortunate. It's really bad too because this is the Defog generation and Rotoms just didn't get it. Though, to be fair, they didn't get it until, I believe, Oras, if I remember correctly. So, Defog seems to have only been giving back to Pokemon that had it in DPP. So, it's very unfortunate, but Rotom definitely misses out there. Otherwise, a Defog set would have been really good on this Pokemon, in my opinion. Regardless, though, next up we have Rotom Frost. Now, speaking of dragons, Rotom Frost, I think, actually could also have some use in OU. And that's mostly because of the fact that this is a really good Scarfer with the Bolt Weave options. My prediction for the set will be... oh, you know what? This is Defog. I literally just mentioned it, didn't get that. Okay, so Thunderbolt instead of Defog again. Thunderbolt, Blizzard, Volt Switch, and Trick, I think will be the best set personally. This is just max speed just because you really want to just be as fast as possible. Also, this will be good for, like, Nidoking, for example, I guess. If it's a Scarf Nidoking, though I don't really know what else hits 85. To be honest, you could probably just still keep it anyway, because once you trick the Scarf away, it does still creep Nidoking. So that's still a good speed creep to have, nonetheless. Because Nidoking will probably be a decent Pokemon this year. My guess is like a B+, A-. It's probably not going to be some sort of meta definer unless a Garchomp gets banned. Though, if it does, I do think it actually has a potential, personally. Regardless, though, this is really good because of a lot of the top tier Pokemon. Things like, for example, Gliscor is definitely going to be our top Pokemon. Same with Salamence will be really good. Dragonite will, of course, be really good. We have Garchomp, which will be phenomenal. I think Garchomp and Gliscor will both be top 5. Stuff like that. And, of course, also, this is really good for stuff like Rain, for example. Things like Kingdra, Pelipper will be very easily beaten by this set, especially as a lead, because you can just Volt Switch out and then be profiting at that point. Because Rain no longer has their Water Ground Switch some Pokemon, which, yeah, I think that that alone does give this Rotom set actually some really nice use as a lead against Rain teams. So with that said, I do think this Rotom set actually could be pretty good in OU. Now, I don't think it's going to be some meta definer, but by pretty good, I mean like for its value, probably like C+, maybe C ranked in viability rankings. But I do think this actually will not be the worst Rotom form this gen. I think it's actually going to be regular Rotom, personally. If not Rotom Van. One of the two will be the worst. I do think this actually will be top 4. Next up, we have Rotom Heat. Rotom Heat, in my opinion, is going to probably be fighting for one of the best 2 Rotom forms of the generation. We have Nasty Plot, Overheat, Volt Switch, and Pain Split. Just max speed, just because, again, similar to the Rotom Frost. It's really just creeping base 85 Pokemon. So we do have that going for us. With Pain Split, we're able to get some HP back, which will be especially important with Rocks hurting his Pokemon again. Now, I do think that because of no boots, that Rotom-Wash has a lot more of a chance of beating this in terms of best Rotom form. However, I do think that the fact that dragons are so prevalent and there are so few fairies, this could be a phenomenal steal to on dragon spam teams. So the fact that this is able to really pressure steals like Metagross, Scizor, Jirachi, etc., even Magnezone as well, I do think that that will give this thing a huge edge as a really good pivot on those sort of teams, which is why I think at Volt Switch will be ran over Thunderbolt on a Nasty Plot set for this Pokemon. I know that obviously, like, committing to a Nasty Plot sweep could also be really good, but I think that this thing will ultimately just profit from having pivot nonetheless. Now, you can totally take out the speed, to be honest. Unlike Rotom Frost, I don't think this is super necessary, but I do think at the same time, just being able to hit first is going to be really valuable in this sort of metagame. So, at the very least, I would definitely run the 88 speed and then maybe go with like a modest nature for the rest in HP. I think that at bare minimum, that would be the investment I would go with speed-wise. But I do think that you're not really missing out either from being able to make sure you can go for a Volt Switch, let's say, on Rotom Wash, if for whatever reason it's a Nasty Plot set. Because I don't think that that could also be a not bad set, though I think there's better sets than Rotom Wash shed for sure. Regardless, though, I do think this definitely has a spot in the top 2 Rotom forms of the generation. I'm curious to see how it will actually do day 1. I'll probably be running it personally, but we'll have to see what happens. Next up, we have Rotom Mow. Now, Rotom Mow I actually think will personally... I think this might be a bit of a hot take, but I do think this actually could potentially be worse than Rotom Frost even. However, it's at least in the same cluster. I think Rotom Heat and Rotom Wash are here. We have Rotom Fan, Frost, and Mow here, and then Rotom Regular is right at the bottom. So, regardless though, I do think that that Rotom Mow will probably not be the best form. I do think there are a couple Pokemon it'll be really useful for, though. Things like Swampert, for example, will be phenomenal for. As well as if for some reason Sap Super Parashop Azu ever becomes a thing, there have been certain like fluctuations in metagame where it's been a viable Pokemon as a very, very bare minimum. However, I do think that at the very least this could have some use. Again, Nasty Plot I think will probably be the best in this. It's not really a defensive Rotom form. It's never really been one. If not Nasty Plot, then Trick Scarf for sure. This could actually be a pretty good Trick Scarfer, to be fair. But I do think a Nasty Plot will ultimately be the best option for it because it does allow this thing to actually pressure things such as grounds, for example, which you're not really going to do with Rotom Heat as easily, though to be fair, most grounds aren't going to resist it either, so there is that. But I think if nothing else, if Swampert ends up being a really top tier Pokemon, this could actually have some use for that, but I wouldn't really hold my hopes on Rotom Mow being a super dominant OU Pokemon. I wouldn't even count on it being OU at all, but we'll see what happens. Finally, we have what, in my opinion, at least on paper, will probably be the best Rotom Wash. We have Volt Switch, Hydro Pump, Pain Split, and Will-O-Wisp. This is just defensive Rotom Wash. It's literally the same investment as Rotom Fan, except for the fact it's Rotom Wash. And I do think this will just be better Rotom Fan, to be honest. And I think defensive is going to be the best. However, obviously, Rotom has a lot of sets it can run. And Rotom Wash is probably, of all of these, the one that I think is most capable of running more than one set. Thunderbolt with a Nasty Plot could be very good, for example, at breaking stuff like Slowbro and also Suicune, especially with Calm Mind. Could be really huge for that. We have Trick Scarf sets, which could just in general be very useful. Trick Scarf Rotom is never really a bad set. It's just never really a standout set either. In terms of defensive, obviously, you can go with Spidef as well. Though I think a Bizdef will ultimately be the play this generation because of how good I think a lot of the physical Pokemon are. But Spidef Rotom would be a phenomenal check to Heatran though, so it is still a thing for sure to keep an eye out for. But yeah, I think that realistically though, best Rotom of the generation comes down to Rotom Heat or Rotom Wash, and I think it purely comes down to the fact of how common Hazard Sack ends up being. Because if Rocks end up being such a meta staple, which I do think that they very well could be, Rotom Heat I think will be slightly worse than Wash, but I think that both will actually be an OU this generation because of how limited the dex is. But Rotom Wash I do think could have some scenarios, specifically if Dragon Spam ends up being prominent, to where Rotom Heat could actually end up outclassing it just as a steel killer. Because while Rotom Wash is a really good steel resist, Rotom Heat is the one that's actually able to really break them quickly. So I do think it has that going for it. If Rotom Wash got Scald ever, I think this would easily be no doubt the best Rotom form. I'd probably even have a contender for S-Rank in OU, to be honest. But because it doesn't get Scald, I do think that it actually is a contentious spot between this and Rotom Heat for the best form of the generation. So the thumbnail will probably have had something like a versus with like Rotom Heat and then Rotom Wash or something. I'll probably actually flip them, to be fair, because ABC order. So Rotom Wash and then Rotom Heat. But regardless though, hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, leave a like below, subscribe if you're new. In terms of the guide that we're going to be going over tomorrow, I believe tomorrow is actually Metagross guide, but I do have to double check that. I have the calendar pulled up, but I'll be putting it on the channel post at some point tomorrow, so don't worry about that. Tomorrow is actually going to be Metagross Day, so hopefully you guys stay tuned. I'm actually really looking forward to doing that one. With that said, I will see you guys in the next video. Make sure, again, like, subscribe, click the links down below, and we will see you guys in the next one. Peace out, guys.